Hi, everyone. My name is Prachi Gupta, and I'm the author of They Called Us Exceptional, which is a memoir. So my memoir is a story of survival in a situation where I think most people would assume that survival was never in question, because my family seemed picture perfect. I grew up upper middle class. My dad's a surgeon. My mom was very devoted and loving. And she stayed at home to take care of me and my brother, Yash. And for most of our lives, Yash and I were best friends. We went to a private school, we both graduated college, and we entered white-collar jobs. But under that facade of perfection, my family was falling apart. And my story is about how I ended up saving myself and what that freedom cost me. My dad came from India to Canada in the 1960s under immense pressure to assimilate. He grew up low income and he struggled to fit in, and he overcame the challenges that he faced by doing really well in school. And he passed on that common immigrant survival strategy to me and Yash. But I think that it would be fair to say that in my household, the focus on academic achievement was particularly intense. My dad started teaching us algebra at the dinner table when I was 7 and my brother was 5. I began studying for the SATs when I was 11, so I would do all my homework, and then I had SAT prep to look forward to, and this was all year round, in the summer too. One time, my dad quizzed me on how screws work, and I had no idea. So he grounded me and forbade me from reading any fiction, because I read a lot of books, and anything that wasn't The Way Things Work by David Macaulay. I hate that book. I'm sorry, David Macaulay. And I still don't know how simple machines work, actually. My dad could be very charismatic and warm and affectionate, but he could also be pretty angry, and his love could sour into hatred in seconds. I remember one time when I was 13 and we had just moved into this new town. He was driving us to what would become our future high school. And he asked my mom to get a map out for directions. And I guess that she did not read them exactly right, or maybe she opened the map too slowly, because my dad started screaming. And he pulled the car over to the side of the road and yelled at her to get out. He left her stranded, and for a moment, I was terrified that I was not going to see my mom again. And he came back to get her, and we had to go back to the school and pretend like nothing happened. I was also very thankful when we got GPS in the car. We never talked about that, not even me and Yash, because we dealt with things by burying our emotions. And that was the secret to doing so well, emotional discipline. But somehow, I used to think that incidences like this didn't really affect my brother, because it was so often, it was my mom, and later it became me who were the target of my dad's anger. But now, looking back, I think that those incidences really scared my brother. And as a boy, he learned to repress all of his negative emotions. And then the world bent that practice into habit as he became a man. We were taught to achieve, and we were taught that success is going to make us happy. And I dedicated myself to that belief. So when I graduated college, I got a job at a top consulting firm. Yash was a senior at Carnegie Mellon studying robotics. But as we settled into what I thought was happily ever after, the moment where we'd finally made it, that's when everything really began to unravel. A few months into my consulting job, I got a call from Yash's friend. Yash wrote a suicide note. Have you heard from him? The campus police eventually found Yash later that night, and he stayed in the psych ward for the next 2 weeks. I did not understand what had happened. Suicide, depression, these were issues that weren't supposed to affect families like ours. And that is exactly why we worked so hard to make us immune to these kinds of struggles. Yash's suicide attempt terrified me, and not just because I almost lost my brother, but because the person that I loved more than anyone in the world felt like he couldn't share his pain with me. Yash told me that the last time that he felt truly happy was in high school, when he had had a full life. He was naturally good at this thing that society had rewarded him for. But I'm not sure that that was the life that he really wanted. I think that Yash would have been happy with a simple life. But I'm not sure if he realized or knew if he'd still be loved or respected by the people that he loved the most if he had chosen that simpler life. Yash's attempt was the first in a series of tragedies that our family would experience over the next couple of years. And these made me question what our drive for success was really costing all of us. I was still at the consulting firm, and I was miserable. I spent a lot of effort shutting down my emotions just so that I could function at work. And I kept everything that was happening in our family a secret, even from my grandparents and my cousins. I was in the office until 10 most nights, and then I'd go home, and because I was a consultant, I had a per diem, but I would go home and just eat shredded cheese straight from the bag with my hands. I didn't even put it in a bowl, and then drink half a bottle of Yellowtail. So yeah, I was doing really well. And one night I left early at 7, and my boss asked me to put in a food order for the team, a chicken and veggie pizza. And so I put in the order, and I went back to my corporate apartment and numbed out with my usual dinner and Law and Order SVU. An hour later, he called me, and he was angry because apparently I'd messed up his pizza order. It was a chicken and onion pizza that I was supposed to get. And I was furious. Out of everything that had happened to me in the past year, it was that phone call that just set me off, and I was enraged. And I stayed up all night, just pacing around, writing in my journal, and everything just finally came rushing out. I stayed up all night, and in the morning, I sent an email to my boss, and I CC'd his boss, and I said, I am not your secretary, and from now on, you can put your own food orders in. And I'd never done anything like that before. I didn't know where that came from at the time. And I saw it as this outpouring of emotion that I was supposed to keep in check, that I had messed up. But looking back, I realized that it's small moments like those where I had begun to assert who I really was and not just who I was supposed to be. I was filled with rage and resentment. I didn't like myself, and I felt really helpless watching Yash and other people in my family struggle. I felt like something in my life needed to change. So I decided to quit my job. And I'm just going to read a short passage from my book about that decision. Papa had raised Yash and me to see the world as a place where our accomplishments, money, and social status defined our worth. The events of the year had prompted me to question this outlook. I saw that despite all that Papa had accomplished and how intelligent he was, happiness and peace were strangers to my father. And that same drive for achievement had nearly killed my brother. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of living beyond Papa's shadow, and that happiness was achievable some other way, or at least that it was possible to live without feeling this horrible all the time. I wanted to try to become a writer. I didn't know how to write what I really wanted to write about. Writing demands conviction, but the last thing that I could put on the page was me, not that I even really knew who that was. I prided myself on my ability to be a chameleon, to change myself to reflect what others needed of me when they needed it. That, I thought, was a quality that made me unique. That was what made me, me. But I believed that deep within me, there was something that I needed to coax out for my own survival, and that writing would help me do that. I wondered if it was possible to feel the way that I did when I was creating as a kid, or if that was a relic of childhood that I had to give up as part of being an adult. I didn't know the answer to these questions, but I knew that I had to find out. A year after I quit my consulting job, I got an internship at Gawker. From there, I was hired by Salon. I was moving closer to my dream, and that gave me confidence. I began paying more and more attention to that little voice inside me, the emotions that I had spent 25 years suppressing. But what I didn't realize was that by leaving my job, I was also leaving this very rigid idea that my dad and my culture and our society had for me. And I started asking questions about where those ideas came from and why they'd held so much power over all of us. I thought that I could continue and come back home and find a way to reconcile the person I was turning into and the person I'd always been. But at home, my questions were seen as a rejection, and things got worse. It got to the point where when I went home on weekends, I didn't unpack. I left my backpack by the garage door in case I had to run away. Because if I said the wrong thing, suddenly I didn't know if I would be able to come back home. Yash, the peacemaker of the family, wanted me to forgive and forget. He had learned how to clamp down even harder on his emotions, but mine had started to overflow. And eventually, I realized that in my desire to hold on to the people that I loved the most, I was breaking myself. I ended up choosing myself, and that felt really selfish. I punished myself for making that choice for a very long time. I have a birthday card from my aunt that I keep on my nightstand. I was 31, covering the 2016 election for Cosmo. My life was very exciting, but it was also very empty, because what I hid from the world was that I barely spoke to anyone in my immediate family, and I thought that I was unlovable. I opened the card, and the last two sentences read, "We are so proud of who you are. Just be yourself." And I just began sobbing, because the thing is that no adult that I loved had ever told me that before. This idea that we could just be accepted for who we are, that blew my mind. The thought that I could be enough to somebody as I was, I had never believed that. For kids who grow up learning that love is conditional, we see that love is something that has to be earned. And then we go out into the world and we see that this message is reinforced, because corporate America tells us that we only matter for what we can produce. And it reinforces a very small and fearful understanding of the world. It teaches us to divest from our emotions and disconnect from ourselves. And that's a very lonely and isolating way to move through the world. It stunts our capacity for vulnerability and intimacy. Success and achievement become masks that we wear that hide us, even from ourselves. And I think many of us think of college as a place of exploration. But for a lot of kids who feel a tremendous pressure to succeed, college can become the place where we learn how to narrow our idea of who we have to be or who we can be. If we relate to our college experience through our fear, this sense of scarcity that the world so often instills in us, it's very easy to begin to reduce our value to a set of grades or our course load or our degrees. So the question that I really hope to pose to students through my book is, what does it mean to face our unknowns and the uncertainty of life, not with our fear, but with our love? And what does that require for those of us for whom love has always been riddled with conditions? How do we learn to see ourselves as whole and as full people whose worth is not dependent on what we study or our work ethic? And I think that this is a very hard thing to do. I think what it takes is faith and imagination. If fear is the reality that we create based on the worst that we've experienced, then love is the vision we move towards with the faith that something better exists beyond. And when we approach new experiences from that place of curiosity, a place where love can thrive, then we can approach college from a place of wonder. We can use our education to figure out who else we might want to be in the world and what else we might want. And then college becomes a place where we can begin to learn how to deepen our connection with something much larger than ourselves, and where we can begin to discover what it means to be enough. Thank you.